Welcome back to the Explainer. Let's just jump straight into this. I want you to imagine a giant geopolitical puzzle. Millions of pieces scattered across an entire continent, and, oh yeah, half of those pieces have literally been on fire for over 2 decades. Well, that was the grim reality of Europe in 1814. After the massive upheaval of the French Revolution and Napoleon just relentlessly marching across the map, the continent was a devastated mess. The old world? Completely gone. Borders? Erased. We were looking at this immense power vacuum. So today, we're going to look at how a small group of diplomats basically sat down in a room in Austria and attempted to literally rebuild the modern world from the ashes.
To make sense of this massive undertaking, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The Napoleonic power vacuum. 2. Meet the architects. 3. 3 rules for peace. 4. Redrawing the map. 5. The 100 Days Panic. And finally, 6. A century of consequences.
Let's kick things off with Section 1. The Napoleonic power vacuum.
Just take a look at this timeline. For 10 brutal years, from 1804 to 1814, Napoleon Bonaparte basically steamrolled the European continent. He took massive chunks of territory, slapped them under French military control, and completely upended the old monarchies. But, as his empire finally started to crack, his exhausted enemies knew they had to act incredibly fast to stop total anarchy. So in March 1814, just a month before Napoleon's initial defeat, the 4 major powers, Great Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, signed the Treaty of Chaumont. This was a desperate, absolutely crucial alliance to secure a final victory, and it included a promise to hold a general European Congress to figure out the peace. By May, they signed the first Peace of Paris, which officially committed everyone to this massive summit in Vienna.
Right. Moving on to Section 2. Meet the architects.
So let's look at the sheer contrast between our 2 main actors here. Over on the left, we've got Klemens von Metternich of Austria, the chairman of the Congress. Metternich was the principal architect here, and his goals were deeply conservative. Basically, he wanted to turn back the clock. He wanted to entirely reverse the revolutionary tides of liberty and republicanism and just lock down unshakable stability. Now on the right, you have Charles Maurice de Talleyrand of France. And think about this for a second. France was the defeated nation. They were the ones who caused all this trouble. Yet Talleyrand was the ultimate negotiator. Relying on nothing but clever maneuvering and a total genius for compromise, he somehow managed to keep a defeated France right there at the big boys' table. 2 drastically different men with totally different goals deciding the fate of millions.
Let's look at their blueprint in Section 3. 3 rules for peace.
Okay, the first rule was legitimacy. Using plain language, this essentially meant putting the old kings back in their castles. The French Revolution had obviously unleashed these radical new ideas about liberty and rule by the people, while the conservative powers at Vienna absolutely hated that. To them, stability meant restoring the traditional, legitimate monarchs who Napoleon had overthrown, and firmly re-establishing those old royal dynasties.
The second rule is probably the most famous one. The balance of power. The main point here is that they never, ever wanted another Napoleon. They had to make sure no single country could get big enough or strong enough to bully the others again. They wanted a strict geopolitical equilibrium, and this exact concept formed the basis of the Quadruple Alliance between Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, a unified front specifically meant to stop any single nation from getting out of line.
The third rule was compensation. Think of this as handing out land prizes to keep everybody happy. If you were one of the winning powers and you gave up some of your territory to help maintain that balance of power we just talked about, you fully expected to be compensated with new lands somewhere else. It became this massive game of high-stakes horse trading, and it directly set the stage for literally redrawing the borders of the continent.
Which brings us right to Section 4, redrawing the map.
I want you to try and mentally visualize the map of Europe right now. Right in the center in the east, there was this massive standoff that actually almost triggered a whole new war. Russia wanted a huge chunk of Poland to build a geographical buffer zone against any future invasions. Prussia, on the other hand, wanted the territory of Saxony and parts of the Rhineland for the exact same reason. Tensions were through the roof. But this is exactly where Talleyrand steps in with a brilliant compromise. To balance the map out, he proposed slicing the pie. Russia would get a reduced version of Poland, and Prussia would get a reduced version of Saxony, along with some of that Rhineland territory. Was it perfect? No. But strategically, it created those physical buffer zones the big powers were demanding without completely wiping the smaller states off the map.
And honestly, this perfectly captures the real diplomatic innovations of the Congress. If we strip away all the stuffy academic speak, what you're looking at is genuinely groundbreaking. For the first time on a continental scale, national reps were sitting down face-to-face to hammer out treaties, instead of just mailing letters back and forth between capitals. This birthed the Concert of Europe, which you can think of as a continental neighborhood watch, designed to maintain these new borders. They also formed the Holy Alliance to push back against secularism. And, quite notably, they even passed some early humanitarian measures, like officially condemning the international slave trade.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Section 5. The 100 Days Panic.
Let's see how this suddenly turns into an absolute crisis. Step 1. In March 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte escapes from his exile on the island of Elba and marches straight back into France. The ultimate boogeyman is back. Step 2. The Congress at Vienna goes into full-blown panic mode. Napoleon's sudden return is like a ticking clock in the room. It forces all these squabbling diplomats to finally stop arguing over minor borders and drastically accelerate their talks. Step 3. Fast forward to June 1815. Napoleon is decisively defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. With the immediate threat finally neutralized, the diplomats breathe a massive sigh of relief and officially sign the comprehensive treaty, the final act, locking in this brand new map of Europe.
And finally, Section 6, a century of consequences. Look at this number, 100. In the short term, historians give the Congress of Vienna credit for one really astonishing achievement. They managed to prevent another widespread European war for nearly 100 years, from 1815 all the way to 1914. By carefully balancing power and keeping those big states on roughly equal footing, they actually created a framework for peace that outlasted almost everyone sitting in that room.
But in the long term, they had a massive blind spot. The architects of this peace were so intensely focused on old monarchies and kings that they completely ignored the rising tides of everyday people. They actively suppressed nationalism and liberalism. But you just can't put the genie back in the bottle. Repressed Polish nationalism soon exploded into bitter revolts. By keeping places like Germany and Italy fragmented just to maintain their precious balance of power, they accidentally fueled massive, unstoppable movements for national unification later on. And slowly, that flexible face-to-face diplomacy they had pioneered, it completely dissolved into two rigid, heavily armed alliance blocks.
And that rigid system brings us directly here, to 1914, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. The very same alliance system that was originally designed in Vienna to contain a crisis did the exact opposite. Because the alliances had become so rigid and so unyielding, a single spark pulled all the great powers into the catastrophic inferno of the First World War. The very map they drew in 1815 ultimately became the bloody battleground of 1914. Which leaves us with a really provocative final question. There is absolutely no denying that the Congress of Vienna is the birthplace of modern multilateral diplomacy. It inspired institutions that lead right up to the United Nations we have today. But by ignoring the will of the people just to protect the crowns of kings, did they truly create the blueprint for modern peace? Or did they just set a 100-year timer for the First World War? It's a fascinating debate. I really hope this explainer gave you the context you need to decide for yourself. Thanks for joining me to explore this massive geopolitical puzzle, and keep learning.